Hello, learners. Today we will be learning about ports, forts, and maritime cities in the module Maritime and Trade Route Tourism. In this lecture, the students will be learning details of different ports of ancient India and medieval India. They will be also learning a comparative analysis of the different ports across different geographical regions and time periods. In addition, they will also learn nuances of maritime and riverine trade, along with forts, fortifications, and their impact on maritime trade. Finally, we shall also be grasping over the concept of political and economic context in case of maritime trade and ultimately the various maritime centers which developed as a result of this international trade. So, as you all know, that India has a very huge coast, and this coast has been beneficial for us when it comes to international trade. And these port towns have existed since the Bronze Age. So, from the Indus Valley civilization, we get examples of international maritime trade which took place across these port towns. The Indus Valley city of Lothal was one of the world's earliest dockyards, and excavations have revealed a tidal basin with masonry walls, stone anchors, seals, and goods from the Persian Gulf, which are evidence that the Indian ports served the Middle East Asian countries when it came to international trade across the ocean. And such evidence also attests that we had sea routes functioning as early as 4,000 years ago, and these ancient ports allowed the trading of various sorts of commodities across the various nations existing. A very important source for understanding the ancient trade routes includes the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. This is an ancient Greco Roman manuscript from around the 1st century CE, which describes maritime trade routes, ports, and commerce along the Red Sea, Indian Ocean, and coasts of India and Africa. It also talks about the various commodities that were traded, highlighting trade in spices, textiles, gems, ivory, and more. And it is a crucial historical source when it comes to understanding the various ports which existed during that time period, as well as the various countries that had international trade relations amongst each other, along with the various commodities that were being traded. The text mentions ports like Poduke, which is the current present day Arikamedu, Puhar, which is Kaveri Pattinam, and Muzira. Muziris is a very interesting port, and the location of Muziris is yet doubted amongst historians and archaeologists alike, with some terming Muziris as the present day Pattanam. But however, this is a matter of debate and yet to be reaching a conclusion. To the west in Gujarat, we have the Bharuch port, which was known as the Barigaza, and in late antiquity, it was a premier port of trade. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea and even Ptolemy note that ships from Egypt, Arabia, and East Africa docked at Barigaza, which linked via land to cities of the Ganges and the Deccan. As one scholar summarizes, Barigaza had direct interaction with all the trade zones in the western Indian Ocean. Now, I would like to make you get familiar with some of the famous and important ports of ancient India, starting with Lothal. As you all know, it is part of the Indus Valley civilization, and it is one of the best documented Harappan port towns. During excavation, a dockyard, bead making workshop, and standardized weights were recovered, which indicate organized maritime trade and craft production. The site also demonstrated long distance contacts within the Western India and the Arabian Sea, and is often cited as an evidence for planned Harappan maritime infrastructure. The photograph beside Lothal is the photograph of the excavated dockyard. Going ahead, we will be talking about Arikamedu, which is an early historic, early common era port, and it is an important Indo-Roman emporium attested in the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. And by archaeological finds, we get to understand the nature of Roman trade that existed during that time period, especially the recovery of evidences like Roman amphorae, Eretine ware, beads, glass, and lots of other things. The maritime culture confirms direct and intermediary trade with the Roman world and Southeast Asia. The site functioned as a bead making and transshipment center. These are the amphorae jar of Roman trade, which proved to be an interesting archaeological find to attest the understanding of trade between India and the Roman Empire. And these are some of the artifacts which were recovered from Arikamedu as a result of excavation. You can see the pottery, ancient Roman pottery, which is displayed here in the picture. Moving ahead, the port town of Muziris, as I have already mentioned, that it is probably identified with Pattanam, Kerala, but there is a huge debate when it comes to its identification. And it is Muziris is a long celebrated Greek, Roman, and South Asian port. It is mentioned in the literature, in the ancient textual sources, and Roman artifacts, evidence of ports indicate a major entrepot of handling spices. So Muziris was famous for its spice trade with West Asia and then the Mediterranean Sea. Its role exemplifies Kerala's early integration into Indian Ocean circuits. Going ahead, we have the famous site of Tamralipta, or present day Tamluk, in Bengal coast, and it is a early historic site of the Maurya, Gupta, and the later period. Tamralipta served as an emporium of trade, and literary sources and archaeological indicators describe it as a hub connecting the Ganges Valley to the Southeast Asia, Ceylon, and the Bay of Bengal trade. This support was instrumental in exporting copper, rice, timber, and other regional produce. Then we have the port of Bharuch or Barigaza, as mentioned in the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea as well as in Ptolemy's literature, where literary references also includes its involvement in trade with places like Mesopotamia, the Arabian Peninsula, and later the Islamic world as well. Major exports include textiles, beads, and aromatic goods. We also have the port of Sopara or Shurpanaraka, which is in Maharashtra, which is an early historic port. The Sopara is recorded in the classical and the indigenous texts as a cosmopolitan port, western direction of India. And excavation and textual research indicate its prominence for coastal and cross-Arabian trade, primarily timber, sesame, textiles, and other cultural materials in the ancient historic period. Then we have the port of Kaveri Pattanam. So the Chola port of Kaveri Pattanam is vividly described in the Sangam literature. Marine archaeological work has recovered submerged wharves and structural remains. This particular picture that you can see is a brick jetty found from Kaveri Pattanam excavation, and this picture credits to the National Institute of Oceanography in Goa. So this port functioned as a major Chola entrepot linking South India to Southeast Asia and the Roman trade network, exporting textiles, spices, and gems. In the medieval period, also trade continued, and different centers of trading centers emerged. Primarily among them were Calicut or Kolikole. Under the Zamorin, Calicut emerged as a medieval center of trade, primarily trading in pepper and textile, which attracted the Arab, Chinese, and later European ships. It functioned as the principal gateway of the Malabar coast during the late medieval period and formed the focal point of early Portuguese encounters in 1498-1500 CE. Then we have the port of Cochin or Kochi in Kerala, which is a major harbour city even now, and the site is of the first substantial European fortifications in India, Portuguese, and its shelter, backwater harbors, and alliances with the local rulers made it a strategic node for pepper trade and later for colonial maritime competition as well. Going ahead, we have the ports of Kollam, which maintained Indo-Chinese and Indo-Indian Ocean trade links. Medieval travelers also record about this particular port and note that significant Chinese presence and direct traffic function during in this port. It was important for spices, coir, and a transshipment point to Southeast Asia and China. We also have the port of Surat in Gujarat, which was founded in the late medieval period, and it became the Mughal Empire's primary port for trade with the Persian Gulf, East Africa, and Europe. Contemporary European travelers describe Surat as a bustling center when it came to textiles, indigo, and bullion that rose sharply in importance in the 16th century CE. We also have the port of Masulipatanam in the Coromandel coast of India, and this connected the Andhra Pradesh area with Southeast Asia and also Persian Gulf traders. It was an important port under regional polities of Vijayanagara, Golconda, and later the European companies for textiles, muslin, and other exports. We have the port of Saptagram or Satgaon in Hooghly, Bengal, which also functioned as a medieval port during the rise of the estuary, and literary and cartographic records supported by geomorphological studies shows its importance until siltation and river shifts led to its decline in the 17th 18th centuries. Commodities primarily included rice, muslin, salt, and bullion. This is an old painting of trade in Masulipatanam. As you can see, the sea has been shown vividly. Along with that, traders and elephants taking various goods for export trading has also been shown very vividly. Here we have a table which gives a comparative analysis of the various ports, harbors which existed in various regions, the coastal areas, their chronological phases, the major commodities which were traded, the nature of the trade network, key sources of evidence, and their historical significance. Starting with Lothal, which is in Gujarat during the Harappan period. As we all know, lots of commodities were exported, and the dockyard has been recovered during excavations in Lothal, followed by Bharuch, Sopara, Arikamedu, Kaviripattanam, Tamralipta, Muziris, Kollam, Calicut, Cochin, Surat, Masulipatanam, Satgaon, and finally Chittagong in the Bay of Bengal. So, this table gives you a comprehensive analysis of the various commodities that were traded across various geographical regions and the kind of references that we find from these kind of places in order to reconstruct the history of maritime trade which existed during the ancient and the medieval period, as well as to give learners an understanding, a grasp over the various countries which had international relations with South Asia during this trading routes. So, in addition to the maritime trade routes in the open seas, riverine ports were also a crucial source of trade. So, the river Ganges, Brahmaputra, Narmada were also navigated in order to shift trade commodities between regions, between different geographical areas. So in the northeast India, since we do not have a sea coast, but the Brahmaputra served similarly. Guwahati in the ancient Pragjotishpur on the Brahmaputra was a significant river port from the early times. One of the historian notes that trade on the Brahmaputra existed right from the 4th century CE on the riverine port of Pragjotishpur. Under the Ahom dynasty, this inland traffic boomed and it remained important into the British era. Even more, Assamese kingdoms were linked by rivers to the Bay of Bengal. Numismatic studies now show that in the 14th 15th centuries, commercial routes ran from Assam's inland markets, Nagaon, Guwahati, down to Bengal's river ports. Coins of that period found at Guwahati and Nagaon, that is current day Nagaon, prove a large scale Assam Bengal trade. Thus, Assam's products, rice, elephants, silk, salt, etc., including tea, traveled via river boats to Calcutta and beyond, even though Assam lacked an ocean harbor. So, it's not always the fact that we have to have a sea coast in order to have our international trade, but even rivers prove to be an essential source to navigate traffic between various regions and to in order to help us trade our commodities between different centers. So this is another table which gives you a brief understanding about the various riverine port which existed, including Hodia, Guwahati, Tejpur, Dhuburi, Dibrugarh, Silchar, Karimganj, and the Vishwanath Ghat. So this again speaks about the river system which existed in these ports, the present day location, as well as their chronological time period, the principal commodities that were being traded, the trade orientation, and their historical references and important remarks. So this is an interesting and important table when it comes to understanding the span of trade which existed across temporal and spatial contexts. Now, moving ahead to forts, in the early historic period, many North Indian kingdoms built walled cities. For example, the Magad capital of Rajagriha was enclosed by a cyclopean stone wall from the 6th century BCE, and excavations have also revealed fortified enclosures around both old and new Rajagriha, built under Bimbisara and Ajatshatru in the 6th 5th century BCE. Moving ahead, we have the capitals such as Kaushambi, Anga, Ahichatra, Ujjaini of Avanti, and Kosal, which also had citadels and mud brick ramparts and deep moats. Contemporary Greek accounts also note that Indian cities had stone citadels on heights and walls studded with towers. Such fortifications allowed the kings to resist the rival states and also secure newly conquered realms by building citadels around strategic cities. These prescriptions echo archaeological finds. Many early forts had concentric walls and multiple moats. For example, craft remains at Rajgir include strategically placed gateways and what may have been residences behind the walls. So the Arthashastra mentions about the various fort engineering and also envisions that a fortress, that is a durga, as essential to a state is recommending earthen ramparts with stone parapets. So the Arthashastra classifies different sort of forts based on their physical nature, which remains a foundational aspects in studying Indian forts. So forts may be classified as Dhanva Durg or desert fort, which is a type of fort surrounded by a desert or an arid stretch of land, and the Mahi Durg or mud fort. This second type of fort is protected by earthen walls and ramparts. Walls are constructed of bricks and stones and can also come under this category. Then we have the third type, which is the Jal Durg or the water fort, which is a type of fort surrounded by water bodies, which could either be natural or artificial. Then we have the Giri Durg or hill fort, which is a type of fort situated on the summit of a hill or a valley, which is surrounded by hills. Then we have the Vriksh or the Van Durg or the forest fort, which is a type of fort covered having a thick forest cover, followed by the Nara Durg or fort protected by soldiers. So this type of fort primarily relies on manpower. So basically, Nara, that is Nar, that is human beings are required for the defense of these kind of forts. So in the peninsular India also we have similar developments during the Sangam period. Tamil kingdom built well developed forts with moats, bastions and turrets. Sangam literature describes Madurai, which was the Pandya capital, which is encircled by towering walls, broad gates, and a deep moat. Early archaeologists have also identified one of South India's first stone brick forts at Pudur, with remains of a large fort and rampart. Smaller hilltop forts and palatial citadels with moats also existed at other Tamil capitals, and in the Deccan, materials varied by region, mud and sun-dried bricks on the Indo-Gangetic plains, and in some, by the early historic era, Indian rulers were building multi-layered fortifications that combine native techniques, mud ramparts, timber palisades, and stonework, a technology which only advanced during the later period. So when we come to the examples of ancient Indian forts, we can start from the Indus Valley civilization, which speaks about the citadel being a very primary source of evidence when it comes to excavation of the major cities of the civilization. The citadel area of Mohenjo-daro was surrounded by a moat. Kot Diji was a fortified site. Kalibanga was surrounded by fortifications, and we also have Dholavira, which was surrounded by fortifications. While some of the scholars suggest that they were not primarily defensive constructions but rather protective embankments or social structures. But nonetheless, the scale and the nature of the fortifications indicate that they served as a defensive purpose, and these are the beginning of the modern day forts that we see in the current Indian landscape. So the second urbanization of India saw the emergence of the powerful Mahajanpads and the 16 major kingdoms across the country, and the growth of these kingdoms led to increased warfare and constant need to strengthen your military defenses and fortifications. Rajgir, the ancient capital of Magad, had two cities, Old Rajgriha and New Rajgriha, which were both surrounded by stone fortifications. The Buddhist text Mahaparinibbana Sutta mentions a fort built near Patali on the orders of Ajatshatru, and the other major fortified capitals include Champa, Kaushambi, Ujjaini, Ahichatra. So these cities typically had mud or stone fortification walls, and while Alexander the Great reached the boundaries of Magad in 326 BCE, these walled cities with citadels actually, was noted by the historians during that time period. So during the Mauryan period also, we have how the Arthashastra talks about the fortified capital. We spoke about the different types of forts that Arthashastra speaks about and its importance, and Kautilya provides detailed instructions on the fort construction, recommending features like mud ramparts with brick, troops stationed along the fort walls, three moats filled with lotuses and crocodiles, adequate provision to withstand sieges, secret escape routes. Kautilya also classified forts on different categories, which we just discussed. And after the last modern king Pushyamitra Shung established the Shunga dynasty, and fortifications from the Shunga period have also been identified with brick walls, mud core, and a surrounding trench. So we also spoke about the various fortifications that existed during the peninsular in peninsular India during the Sangam period. And one of the earliest South Indian forts with stone and brick construction was reported from Pudur, and the Sangam literature vividly describes the grandeur of the fort at Madurai with its towering walls, wide gates, and a deep moat surrounded by dense forest. The Gupta period also encompassed a large part of the subcontinent, and it is primarily known for its architecture. However, there are military fortifications also observed during this period. The Allahabad stone pillar inscription records that during the southern expedition in the 4th century CE, the emperor Samudragupta captured hill forts of Mahendragiri and Kottura in the Ganjam region. So the hill fort of Mahendragiri was originally built by the early Ganga kings, and the Garwa fort complex houses one of the oldest remains of the Gupta period, including 5th century architectural relics of temples and towns. The Basar fort in present-day Bihar, also known as Raja Bisal Ka Ghar, is believed to have been constructed during the Gupta period. However, we do not have adequate evidence to support such a claim, and that is a matter of debate and future research. The medieval India gave us lots of different sorts of forts when it came to the Delhi Sultanate period, the Mughal period, and even by the Rajputs in present-day Rajasthan. So the architectural changes in these forts mirrored the evolving landscape of the country, and the Delhi Sultanate had its fortifications laid by Qutbuddin Aibak, and followed by that we have the Sultanate architecture involving the use of arch and dome technique. And the early sultans of Delhi also fought against the onslaught, leading to the repair of the Lahore fort. Followed by that, the Tughlaq dynasty introduced new architectural trends. The Bahmani Sultanate introduced Iranian architectural techniques, including the water supply system in the Bidar fort. And the Mughal era saw the development of a syncretic architectural style with influences from the Persian, Indian, and other regional traditions. Introduction of artillery in the 16th century led to changes in fort architecture, with lower and thicker walls, bastions, and taller gates to accommodate elephants. Now, while we are talking about forts, we cannot skip the nature of forts, which was built by the Marathas, and their naval technology and their naval architectural actually might that they had and also coastal trade. So the 17th and 18th century, the Maratha Empire turned its attention to the sea, and Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj built a string of sea forts along the Konkan coast to counter the Arabs, Portuguese, and the Siddhis. Notable examples are Sindhudurg, Vijayadurg, Suvarnadurg, and Korlai near Mumbai, and these forts were engineering marvels. Massive laterite walls encircled the islands with multiple bastions mounting cannons. The Sindhudurg fort began in 1664 on an islet offshore from Malwan, had walls 30 feet high and a secret entrance in the tide line. Vijayadurg was similarly reinforced. Shivaji realized its potential as a formidable naval base, and later it was used to command Maratha ships in the Arabian Sea. Inscription record warehouses and arsenals built inside the forts to store grain, ammunition, and boat timber, enabling them to withstand long sieges at sea. So these forts on the coastal areas and even on the border regions also functioned as interesting centers for trading. So archaeology corroborates their maritime role. So underwater surveys of Vijayadurg have uncovered a stone dry dock, subsurface walls, and importantly dozens of stone anchors at the triangular types embedded in fort walls and quays. One study concludes that these anchors, common up to the 17th century, are the only evidence to support Vijayadurg as a port during the early historic period. In fact, dozens of stone anchors were deliberately placed on the dock walls as mooring bits. Similar anchors were also found at Sindhudurg Sindhudurg and elsewhere, confirming continuous anchorage usage. So these coastal forts were more than military posts. They controlled the routes. The Marathas levied custom duties on passing ships and even issued pass rights to the friendly shippers. Under Kanhoji Ange, the Maratha navy grew to some 200 ships, exacting tribute from Gujarati and African traders as far as Dhabol, and at times intercepting European vessels. So these ports functioned as also military centers as well as trading centers, controlling trade in order to actually have a control over the maritime trade that took place. So the fort granaries and magazines recorded in the Maratha administrative papers underline their role in logistics. A stable supply of provisions allowed the Marathas to blockade ports such as Goa and Janjira. Thus, by the 18th century, Maratha coastal fortresses had become hubs of both military power and mercantile traffic, linking the Konkan to the inland markets. The political and economic context of these fortifications and ports were instruments in statecraft and commerce. Kings built forts to project their power internally and also to control the trading that took place. Similar, Vijayanagar's empire fortified riverine towns to protect spice and cotton trade routes, while Mughal governors made Surat a separate suba to streamline port administration. Ports themselves often became cities of great wealth. The architectural and the archaeological and textual sources align on the various goods that were actually used during this trading. Pepper, coconut, ivory, pearls, and fine textiles were India's chief exports, while gold coins, wine, glass, and luxuries came in. For example, excavations at the Chola port of Kaviripattanam yielded mangrove wood pillars and Chinese celadon shards, indicating trade with China. Likewise, a Chinese shipwreck from the Song era has been found at Gujarat, carrying porcelain bound for the Indian market. For cities like Patna or Pataliputra grew on that trade, which flowed from ports to the markets via the riverine routes. The Arthashastra's emphasis on strong ports was mirrored by equally detailed advice on ports. It calls for quays cut in stone near safe harbors and duties to fund naval patrols. The technology and infrastructure of the forts also relied on local materials and ingenuity. Ports too had public works. The harbors at Tamralipti in Bengal had stone stair gates, and lime docks at Kozhikode and Kochi have been excavated along with brick granites. Inscriptions record state built jetties. The Tuluva Chalukya king mentions building a stone quay at Mangalore. Such infrastructure underpinned trade. Without safe harbors and storage, the pepper and the cloth exports of Malabar and Coromandel coast could not have been flourished. So basically, these forts were not just centers when it came to their military infrastructure, but they also had a political and economic background to their existence. So, this extensive and exhaustive trade across different centers via the sea route, via the riverine route, led to the emergence of medieval maritime centers. So these maritime centers functioned as important places, and cities grew along these centers, and also they functioned as important places of trade and power. On the eastern coast, the Coromandel ports facilitated with trade with China and the Bay of Bengal. The Vijayanagar Empire fostered ports like Ponnai and Pulikat. Pulikat became especially important. It was the main Vietnamese and later Dutch trading port on the Bay of Bengal. And in the Bengal Delta, we have Saptagram or Sadgaon. And following that, the Indian Ocean trade system connected all these ports. From the 8th century onward, Arabian ship owners began to dominate trade along India's coasts. Arab brought Middle Eastern goods and carried Indian spices to the Gulf and East Africa. After Vasco da Gama's arrival at Calicut, European powers intervened. So the Portuguese seized Goa, captured Malacca, and built forts at Cochin, Calicut, and Surat. So this table gives you an understanding about the various regions, the Mahajanpads, the early Common Era, Sangam Era, Chol, Vijayanagar time, Maratha, and followed by the Mughal early modern, and the notable forts during that period, the various features that we see of that particular period fort. As you can see, the Rajgriha fort speaks about walled capitals with mudstone ramparts. The Patliputra, Sopara, Arikamedu speaks about Indo-Roman trade and massive fort walls. Kaveri Pattanam, Muziris speaks about ports with docks, shipyards, exports of pepper, pearls. Madurai, Calicut, Cochin, and Pulikat are fortified cities with moats, global trade, Arab, Chinese, Southeast Asian links. Sindhudurg, Vijayadurg, Janjira forts and Bombay focused on coastal sea forts with layered walls and moats, naval bases protecting trade. Surat, Masulipatam, Daman, and Goa had European influenced ports, custom houses, warehouses, exports, textiles, and indigo trade. Now we will be discussing about the prominent maritime centers which existed, starting with Kaveri Pattanam in the early maritime urbanism. So Kaveri Pattanam is identified with the Sangam period, and literary sources provide detailed descriptions of its urban layout. Sources such as Silapaddikaram portray the city as a spatially divided between a coastal mercantile center and an inland administrative and residential quarter. Archaeological investigations include terrestrial excavations and marine surveys, and materials remain such as rollated ware, Roman amphora fragments, and semi-precious stone beads attest to the city's integration into trans-oceanic trade networks. Politically also, Kaviripattanam functioned as a Chola royal city where control over maritime exchange reinforced state authority and enabled overseas commercial and diplomatic engagements. Followed by that, Arikamedu also functioned as a trans-regional trading city, and it is located near modern-day Puducherry, and it is an early maritime city whose prosperity was linked to the Indo-Mediterranean exchange. Excavations led to the dense occupational sequence being revealed by brick-built structures, drainage systems, industrial zones for bead manufacture, and extensive imported material culture. The urban economy of Arikamedu was export-oriented, specializing in luxury goods such as stone beads and fine textiles, and the abundance of the Roman amphorae, Aretine ware, and West Asian glasswares suggest the presence of foreign merchants or permanent trading communities within the city. Notably, Arikamedu lacks evidence of monumental fortifications, indicating that its security was derived less from military strength and more from commercial integration and diplomatic stability. The decline of Arikamedu appears to correlate with shifts in long distance trade patterns rather than political upheaval. Followed by that, we have the mercantile city of Kozhikode in the medieval period. Medieval Kozhikode or present day Calicut represents a mature form of Indian maritime urbanism, which is characterized by the commercial pluralism and relatively decentralized political control. Uh, Urban organizations in Kozhikode revolved around commercial streets such as the Valiyangari and residential quarters structured along occupational and ethnic lines, and religious institutions catering to diverse populations. Archaeological and architectural remains include mosques, temples, and warehouse structures, which indicate the centrality of trade in shaping the city's built environment. Unlike Indian capitals, Kozhikode relied less on heavy fortifications and more on diplomatic neutrality and commercial reputation for security. We also have the mercantile center of Surat, which developed as a major maritime city during the Mughal period, functioning as a riverine sea interface along the Tapti River. And the city's urban form reflected its administrative and commercial importance as well. Surat emerged as a financial hub, supporting credit instruments such as bills of exchange and acting as a nodal point in early modern global capitalism. Archaeological survivals include warehouses, funerary monuments of merchant elites, and European factory remains, which gives us an understanding about Surat's role as a maritime city under the imperial authority. The maritime center of Masulipatanam was also a textile production and maritime urbanized center and represents a distinctive model of maritime urbanism based on manufacturing on the Coromandel coast. Urban evidence indicates a planned settlement with merchant warehouses, production zones, and foreign trading compounds established by the Dutch and the English. Political control over Masulipatanam shifted between the Qutub Shahis, the Mughals, and the European companies. Then we have the port of Sadgaon, which is a deltaic maritime urbanism center, which illustrates the dynamics of the maritime urbanism in a deltaic environment. Sadgaon functioned as a major emporium connected to Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean trade network, and textual references and archaeological indicators point towards a prosperous city with a dense mercantile population. However, the silting of the river channels led to its eventual decline, demonstrating the decisive role of environment when it comes to maritime cities. These are few references that you can refer for your future studies, and as you would be well aware after this lecture that how trading ports and cities emerge and how they gradually decline. And international trade has been existing for a long period of time with various commodities exported and imported across regions. And archaeology serves as an interesting tool when it comes to reconstructing our international maritime trade. Thank you.